And Sir Bennett says we are live. Greg Joseph.
Hey, Brian.
Back here again.
I am. I'm very glad to be back here again, too.
So what's it like coming on the second time versus the first time?
Doubly terrifying.
Yeah.
No, it's great. I'm much more relaxed. In the first one of these, I'm trying to think if I had ever done a podcast before. I have. I've done one, maybe two before our first time together, but that's about it. So, this time just feels much more relaxed and natural. And you're an easy guy to talk to. And I've said before, Brian, this is an excellent platform for you. I think the long form conversation format, you really shine. So I'm glad to be back with you here.
It really takes one skill set, and that's just being curious, right? If you're actually curious, if you actually are interested and you want to hear what people have to say, then this is I think, very easy to do.
Yeah. And what a great thing to teach our kids to be curious and ask questions and be critical thinkers. You and I have had that conversation before too.
Yeah. So yeah, this would be good we were just talking at our 7th grade class earlier, and they follow it loosely, right? This is not content that 7th graders are going to find terribly intriguing or interesting, but
right.
It is good to at least have those conversations, and you can see at least their interest is piqued that there are these conversations taking place and that they can kind of grow into being adults that can have these kind of long conversations with people, either people they agree with or people they don't agree with, which is healthy.
I think there are so many demands on young people's minds now that, 10 to 12 seconds is the attention span that you're seeing. And then it's on to something else. It's like the squirrel thing. Yeah. I mean, and studies show, if you've seen the marshmallow test or not, you know about the marshmallow test?
No, what's that?
Where this is from many years ago, but they'll come in and they'll give a child an option. They'll say, okay, you can have one marshmallow now. Okay. Or I'm going to leave and then I'll come back and then I'm going to give you 2 marshmallows. So which one do you want? And some of them take the 1 marshmallow now and then that's the end of it. But others will wait. And then what they do is when the person with the marshmallows leaves the room, they'll start a clock. And the longer the student will wait before they say something and melt down is a really accurate measure of their future success in life. Delayed gratification, being able to wait until you get your reward, patience, perseverance, all those things.
Not impulsive.
Right.
So, and they're doing better at that now or worse at that now? Is there any trends?
If I had to guess, I'd say worse, but I don't know.
That would be my guess.
I don't know.
Yeah.
It's a classic study.
Yeah.
But interesting.
Yeah.
We have a school here at Trinity too.
We do have a school at Trinity. You should check out Trinity Lutheran School.
Oh, you should. Yes. While we're on the subject.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And your kids are in it and my kids are en route to coming in. They're in preschool and such. But so you're back, and you're back because I got emails. We had a lot of comments, even word of mouth, people coming up. And last time you were on, I posed the question at the beginning and I said, hey, we're interested in bringing Greg Joseph on, not just once every 2-3 years, but bringing you on maybe a couple times a year, maybe 3 times, maybe 4 times. Give us your feedback. And the feedback was 100%. I didn't hear any feedback that said, let's stick to once a year and stop there. So I think people are very interested in just having your profession is not just as a lawyer, but what you're doing as a lawyer is about having your finger on the pulse of what's going on within the country, all these different things that are going on behind the scenes that we normal people don't necessarily see. We might see the after effects of this, but you're kind of on the front lines of seeing these things early. So I think people are interested in that. So that's why you're back on, and you've got a lot of different cases, different things that you want to talk about. This might be one where I just kind of sit here because you've got the cases. I'll follow up with questions, but you can kind of lead on things you want to talk about. I know the first thing we were just kind of chatting about before we started recording was this misinformation. And I think that's that's probably going to feed into some of the things you talk about, but understanding what misinformation is, kind of the history of that. And if you just want to explain that, I thought that was helpful.
Yeah, I would love to. Misinformation, disinformation, what's the other one? Malinformation. So mis, dis, and mal. And we hear those things now and we just think, well, yeah, okay. I mean, it's become part of our lexicon. It's just what we say. Oh, it's misinformation. Well, until a few years ago, nobody used the word misinformation or disinformation. And it's really an insidious word. And the reason is because once you recognize this idea of misinformation, you're surrendering to someone else the power to determine the truth or falsity of that statement. So, in other words, what happens is when somebody says, oh, you're spreading misinformation, then we get caught up in this idea of truth versus falsity. Well, this isn't misinformation. It's true. Look, it says this person says it and this other person says it, and it was here in this scholarly journal or whatever it is. This isn't misinformation. This is accurate and this is true. But once we go there, once we have that argument, we've already lost, because it's not a question of truth or falsity. We don't get to speak only things that are true. We get to say what we want. That's the First Amendment, right? And this is exactly what the founding fathers saw, that no, someone else doesn't get to determine truth and falsity and then throttle speech based on what they perceive is truth or falsity. So the other way to put it, okay, is the government is not the arbiter of truth. The burden is not on you to demonstrate that what you're saying is true. So when I first sat down with Dr. Jensen in his case, he was being investigated for, one of the things he was being investigated for was this idea of misinformation. Okay. And I saw what that did to him and what it would do to any of us in that situation, which is, wait a minute, I'm not spreading lies and falsehoods. I'm not spreading misinformation. And he produced scholarly journals and he produced studies in well-respected, well-regarded medical journals. Okay. And I said, the problem is that you're looking for the perfect snowball to win the snowball fight, when what we should be doing is not having the snowball fight. There shouldn't be any snowball fight. Okay. Don't engage. But once you engage, then it becomes about the truth or falsity instead of being about what it should be about, which is, you don't get to tell me what I say, what I can and can't say in this context. No, we have a First Amendment. We have free speech here for a reason. Another example of this idea is you hear people talk about stakeholders, stakeholder capitalism. Okay. Well, there's capitalism or free market. That's where two people voluntarily enter into a transaction with each other. I want what you have. You want what I have. I want to buy an iPhone. You want my $500. Here's my $500. I get my iPhone. Both sides benefit, right? That's a free market. It's what this country was founded on. It's been phenomenally successful around the world, lifting billions of people out of poverty. No question about it. So what's the stakeholder idea? What does that mean? Well, you can't just have someone buying an iPhone with money. You have to have somebody who might be impacted by that. Somebody else who makes cases for iPhones. Well, they have a say because their cases might not fit the new iPhone. And what environmental impact does this have? Well, that's another stakeholder. They should be able to come to the table and have a say. Okay. And suddenly we have all these people around the table, these stakeholders that have nothing to do with the underlying transaction. Well, who decides who the stakeholders are? I don't decide who the stakeholders are. Government decides who the stakeholders are. Okay. Or a board or the company does or whatever. Okay. But the point is you're introducing variables that shouldn't be there. So we don't think about it when we hear, oh, yeah, stakeholders. People are stakeholders in this transaction. Says who? I didn't say they were stakeholders. They have nothing to do with it. Okay. But we accept it and it becomes part of our lexicon.
Is that what moves to crony capitalism? Is that the right word?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's that idea, by the way, is the same on both sides. You call it crony capitalism on one side and corporate welfare on the other side. Okay. The right calls it one thing, the left calls it one thing, but it's the same idea. And it's a completely legitimate objection, which is you have businesses getting into bed with government. And that's what's happened in this country, at an alarming scale, is you have businesses and government becoming one entity.
So is it then what happens next? Is it that you have this now group, government, corporations, stakeholders, as you're calling them? Do they become the ones that become the judge of what you're allowed to say publicly? Is that how this then moves forward? Because I guess my real question is, who becomes this judge? There's this new judge that says, you can't say that. Oh, you interviewed Dr. Donna Harrison, who's the president of AAPLOG, and she's actually wrong. So we're going to put a disclaimer here to let you know that the doctor is speaking misinformation, but this board of health or whatever is going to tell you what the real truth is. Who are these people that are this judge?
It's an awesome question, and it's a perfect segue to talk about what happened. I think oral arguments were 3 weeks ago in this Murphy versus Missouri case. Began its life as Missouri versus Biden, and the attorney generals of Missouri and Louisiana brought suit. Okay. And this was based on the Twitter files. And if nobody's familiar, if people aren't familiar with what the Twitter files are, basically some journalists, Matt Taibbi and Schellenberger and a couple other journalists did some really extensive digging into what's been going on behind the scenes. I mean, we've talked about this before, that people are being shadow banned, or things that you expect to be popular are actually being throttled, and they're not getting the views that you'd expect that they would. So these journalists did some digging to figure out what was going on. And as it turns out, there's a huge apparatus that's been working behind the scenes with government, between government and these social media providers, to determine what should be throttled and what should be boosted, and who should be deplatformed, and which subjects should be allowed to be shared and which ones shouldn't be shared. Okay. So this case was about, to what degree are we going to tolerate government interfering with private companies when it comes to speech? Because the critical question about it is, at what point does government become an actor? At what point does it become a private company deciding which speech it's going to allow on its platform? When does that cross over into government exerting its will and throttling the speech that it doesn't like? And so, put a different way, you could say it's the difference between persuasion and coercion. And when we look at some of these things, for example, I mean, there were messages that were sent between these government agencies and Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, and there are others that were profane, that were, I want to know why this wasn't dealt with yet, and I gave you this list last week, and why am I still looking at this website right now, and why is this message allowed to be here?
And that's from the government to the representatives at these different social media.
Correct.
Sites. Okay.
Yep. I've
given you the orders and you didn't do it, and I'm ticked about this.
Right. Now, there wasn't the overt threat. Okay. There wasn't, if you don't do this, then we will regulate you out of existence, or we will revoke your Section 230 antitrust exemption. So Section 230, just as an aside, is, these social media companies aren't liable for what people post to those sites. There's an antitrust exemption, because under different circumstances, without that, okay, you'd have a platform like Facebook, and if someone says something on Facebook that violates, the First Amendment, or it's offensive or hate speech or whatever we want to say about it, then the platform itself could be liable under different circumstances. So they passed Section 230 to say, nope, you're not liable. We have an interest in free speech. We want there to be an open dialogue, and so you can't get sued for it. So the unspoken sort of hammer there is that, what if government decides it's going to revoke the Section 230 antitrust exemption? And then everything changes. Okay. But again, there were no overt threats. There was no, if you don't do this, then we will do this. There were only sort of unspoken threats. And, we don't have access to the back rooms of Facebook. We don't get to send a private message to the CEO or the content moderator or whatever. So in that sense, yeah, government has access that we couldn't possibly dream of. If we sent a message to someone, and said, I want this down immediately, and if you don't, come on, we'd be laughed at. There's nothing there. But at the same time, it's pretty difficult to make the argument that any government influence is coercive inherently, because governments have been communicating with media outlets for many years. I mean, the New York Times, there are documented examples back in the 50s, 60s, especially, where, you had embedded reporters in the New York Times and Washington Post and on television and radio and whatever. So there's always been sort of open communication. It's just that it's never really manifested itself in this way, where you have people being deplatformed and deprived of their voice online, which today is, a pretty important thing.
So you're saying it's a given. We know it's not a conspiracy. We know for a fact that there was what was the word? Coercion and persuasion. So persuasion was definitely taking place. That's not being debated.
Right.
The actual case is whether or not it's coercion.
Correct.
And that's the only way that there's going to be any kind of legal repercussions.
Right.
And my takeaway from that is either way, anyone watching this should say that's not good. That's a serious issue that we should have our eyes on and understand, even if the government's not going to come down, which we'd like them to do, and to kind of bring back those First Amendment rights. Even if they don't, this is a problem, and you should at least be aware of that and know that whatever you're engaging in, even if it's here on YouTube, there's a good chance that they're manipulating the algorithms and they're putting things in front of you that they would rather you see rather than maybe the things that you would actually want to see.
Absolutely. Yes. And whether it's persuasion or coercion, know that when you look at things like view numbers and likes, and you wonder why your perspective isn't part of this conversation in the comments section of this site or whatever it is. Why isn't someone talking about XYZ? It's not organic. I mean, it's manipulated, toward an end. And you can disagree about the merit of that end, but there's no question that there's manipulation.
Mm-hmm.
Whether you want to call it persuasion or coercion, whatever. But yeah, people need to be aware that it's going on every day.
So that's going on in Missouri versus...
That is Murphy versus Missouri.
Okay.
Yep. It began as Missouri versus Biden, but now it's Murphy versus Missouri. I don't remember exactly what the mechanism was that caused the change, but it is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
So, but yeah, those are the arguments. Where does coercion cross over? Where does persuasion cross over into coercion? And the government argued the case convincingly, and it's hard. It's hard to draw that line because we can't say that there can be no communication. But then when does it cross over into, because once it becomes a state actor, that's really the question. Once it becomes a government actor, then you can no longer throttle speech that way.
Mm-hmm.
So really what the government was arguing was, this isn't a government actor. No, we're just like anybody else, just persuading, using our voice like anybody else can. And the other side was saying, no, that's not the same thing as private speech.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, oral arguments were, I think, 3 weeks ago, give or take.
Okay.
And we'll see. Supreme Court desk. I think they said they expect a decision this summer sometime.
Okay.
So stay tuned.
Yeah.
That'll be a fun one.
Yeah. What other things are going on, maybe on kind of that national scale? That's good for us to have eyes on.
Well, we talked about Texas the last time,
yeah.
What was going on in Texas. And, well, let's just say it's a total mess. Texas passed a law that allowed, that gave local law enforcement the power to start enforcing immigration laws, detaining and deporting.
So that's like your county?
Right. And state officials.
Okay.
State and county. But the problem is that the Constitution reserves that power for the federal government and not states. So when Texas passed that law, it went to the Fifth Circuit. The Fifth Circuit said, nope, we're going to stay enactment of this law pending review by the U.S. Supreme Court. So they stayed it. And then the U.S. Supreme Court, as I understand it, briefly vacated the stay, which meant that they allowed Texas to begin enforcing its own laws, to begin getting things under control down there. But then that was only very brief. I want to say it was within a day or two or something like that they reversed it and then reinstated that stay. So to put it differently, the federal government right now is fighting to make sure that the border stays open and porous. And the states are more or less powerless to at least use their own law enforcement personnel to do anything about it.
So everything that took place that Texas did, and then you talked about some of the National Guards of different states, right? And them all kind of working together. Are those endeavors paused right now?
Yes.
Okay. So there's no work being done by those states and by, of course, Texas working together in order to stop that. That's paused.
Right. That's right. And I don't know the exact, I'm sure they're trying to find a workaround.
Yeah.
But as of this moment, yeah, no local laws to deal with immigration.
Okay. So where does this go? What's kind of the next move? Are they just waiting for the Supreme Court, or, as you said, workarounds? And this battle is going to continue.
This battle will continue. I believe the case, the case might have been remanded to the Fifth Circuit because it wasn't a merits decision. It was only about whether, this gets stayed pending review of the final, law. So I think it was sent back to the Fifth Circuit for a merits decision on it. I think the federal district court judge in Texas agreed that I'm not going to go too much into the merits, but yeah, I believe it's back with the Fifth now for a decision on merits.
So what's the best argument you've heard from the federal government side saying, stop messing with the border, just let it be, whoever's coming over is coming over? What's the best argument you've heard from their perspective? Because that one's tougher for me to wrap my mind around on why we wouldn't want some kind of law and order at that border. Because I mean, you've seen, what was it? They just had one was like 500 fighting age Chinese men. It was a whole battalion rushed the border and came over, and that was like a whole big deal.
Right.
And I think some of them got contained, but I'm not sure. But you look at those things and you go, well, that's certainly not good. So what is that side? What's their argument for? No, that's okay.
So the best argument for it right now is from the humanitarian perspective, to say, hey, these are families and kids who want a better life, and immigrants made this country, and they're right. I mean, immigrants did make this country. That's right. Now, the circumstances were slightly different then than they are now. Okay, but the most convincing argument is from the humanitarian angle. We hear too that they're willing to do jobs that Americans aren't willing to do. Okay, that's nonsense. No, that's not true at all.
I think you got an example we can pivot to here in, in a couple minutes. That's
right.
Yeah.
Right. So that's simply not the case. But when people hear that, of course, they're sympathetic to families who want a better life and kids who want a better life. But that's not consistent with, I guess, our historical jurisprudence. And it's really not very good for the people who live here already in terms of job creation. And
do you think it's good for them too? Even like the immigrants?
Absolutely not. No. And I think that's something that people need to realize now is you're talking about exploitation. This isn't a favor. I mean, look, we can throw the doors wide open and welcome as many newcomers, whatever you want to call them. Okay. But eventually the money's going to run out. We can put them up in a hotel for a while, or we can feed them or whatever. And that's all right. But sooner or later, you have to talk about self-sufficiency, because these systems aren't sustainable. And don't take my word for it. Go to New York, go to Chicago, go to Los Angeles, go to any of these places and go to Florida, where they're seeing these massive influxes of people. Denver, okay, anywhere in Texas or Arizona. We simply don't have the infrastructure to support these. I mean, and they're being exploited. This isn't a favor. So the solution is going to have to be, we've got to find something to do once the money runs out. What are they going to do? They're in a strange country. They don't speak our language. Simple things that just cultural differences. I mean, you have to feel bad because they must be bewildered by some of these things. Nobody's making any effort to solve these problems. So I think they're only going to get worse. So, but this idea that we're doing everyone a favor by bringing them here is just not accurate. It's really a lot more cynical and ugly than that, unfortunately.
What do you think the motivation is? Because what you're saying seems like common sense. Right. Now, I can understand, the person that I sit next to at the supermarket who has a different point of view, right? Because they're someone at the supermarket and they're a mechanic or they're a nurse or whatever. But what about these people who their profession is to understand what you're talking about? Like, they've got a legal mind. They know Constitution. They know, these demographic studies of what's going on in Denver and stuff like that. So they know better, right? The common person might not know better. We can be deceived. The people in the more inner circle, they know better. So why are they doing it? What do you think?
Well, there's the non-PC answer. Okay.
Let's do that
one. The non-PC answer is funny how we're seeing huge throngs of people who are leaving blue states like New York and like Massachusetts and like Minnesota. they're leaving for red states. Well, you have a decrease in population. Okay. Well, the new arrivals, illegal immigrants, are being sent to those cities. And I mean, it's called the Great Replacement Theory, and it's absolutely railed against by everyone on the left. But if you do the math.
So what's the Great Replacement Theory?
Great Replacement Theory is that you're bringing in new voters.
Okay.
You're bringing in populations that weren't there before, and you're sending them to blue states and blue cities to make up for the fact that they have population drains that are going to red states. Well, the census is coming up in 6 years. And when they take the census, everyone is counted, not just legal American citizens. Everybody's counted for the census.
Okay.
So you have, and that would mean, congressional seats are apportioned based on the new census. And
if Minnesota has more, that's better for one side. If Texas has more, that's probably not good for the same side.
Right. So you see, you're replacing the people who left with new voters who will ostensibly be loyal to those who let them into the country and who gave them things like free travel and airfare around the country, or gave them debit cards that are recharged every month with thousands of dollars on the debit cards. Okay. All of which are happening right now. So yeah, that's the idea, is that they would be loyal to the people who put them there, and you'd replace those votes. So again, it's cynical and it's terrible, but kind of points in that direction.
What about this Tyson case you were talking about? I feel like that kind of fits in here too.
This is only one example, but you could point to dozens of them. And there are dozens of companies that are doing this. Okay. But there was a Tyson chicken plant that just closed recently, a processing plant in Iowa. It had been there for a very long time. And almost concurrently, within a very short time, there was a job fair in New York. Tyson Chicken, we're hiring. Oh, you are? Gee, how much are you paying your new hires there in New York that has suddenly seen a massive influx of people from elsewhere in the country that aren't here legally? Well, funny enough, we're paying them far less compared to what we would be paying American native-born workers. We're paying them a lot less. Oh, okay. So that's happening at Tyson, but again, you could point to any number of other companies that are doing the same thing. And
so the theory there is that Tyson's looking and they're saying, okay, we've got these people, they've worked 25 years or so, they've gotten their normal kind of raises or whatnot. We're spending X amount on labor here on this plant in Iowa. So if we close that, not too concerned about the workers, give them a 3-month severance or whatever and say, thank you for your 25 years. And then we can open up over here and we can pay 60% of what we're paying, in which means we've now got a 40% more profit margin.
Right. And profits go up. And funny, the companies like Tyson and the other companies who sign up for this donate to politicians. And politicians like that kind of thing. They like when they get money for their campaigns.
They do.
Yeah. And these companies have a lot of money to give. And so, funny enough, there's a connection between these corporate donations and these changes in policy. And suddenly nobody has a problem with it anymore. And I'm not drawing any lines between parties here either.
Right.
I think both sides are every bit as guilty of it.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a self-perpetuating problem. And unfortunately, the voters, the people who work at Tyson or who used to work at Tyson Chicken, they don't come out of it so well.
Yeah. And they don't really have much of a say because Iowa's not even a swing state. Right. So their voice, unless if it reaches national news, which it sounds like this one has reached some national news. So we'll see what kind of pushback, if any. But so kind of connecting all of those dots, you've got a border where people come across, and best construction is all of the people in the government that have eyes on this. Right. They're highly humanitarian driven, and their hearts just melt, and they can't sleep well at night if these people end up getting stopped at the border and being told to go through a proper immigration process. So maybe that's it. Or maybe they let those people over and then they ship them to cities, and maybe there's this whole great replacement theory. Or maybe they can now have companies, like you said, Tyson's just one example, and Tyson can now all of a sudden make great profit margins because they've got very cheap labor. And then with those great profit margins, they can send a little bit to those politicians. They can keep a lot for themselves. And everyone in this little inner circle is happy. And every actual social worker and every, regular citizen and citizens are in cities like New York City or Minneapolis or Iowa, or pick your city, they're all putting their hands up and going, what in the world's going on? And that small inner circle is saying, I don't know, I'm on a yacht because I just made a lot of extra money. So let's keep that border open, Texas.
You said it.
Possibly.
Possibly. That's a theory.
Yeah.
Right. It's only a theory and a conspiracy theory.
A conspiracy theory.
Right.
Yeah.
That.
So maybe we'll ban this video.
Right.
Maybe it'll be shadow banned and we're just talking to ourselves.
Right. The best thing to do is not connect the dots.
Yeah.
That's what you should do.
Yeah.
And then everything will make sense.
That's wild. Do you think this stuff's going to get better?
Yeah, I do think it's going to get better. But I think it's going to take a while. I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. I mean, you and I have talked about this before. I think we're in for a crazy year, but we'll see. But I think it will get better. Yeah. And I think, look, I mean, a lot of the people coming here are Christians. They believe in family values and the nuclear family structure because it works. And it's worked for a very long time. So, not all of them are Christians. Okay. But a lot of them are. Central America. I mean, you know better than I do.
So you're not woke. They're those kind of ideas are certainly more foreign. That's very American and maybe Northern European a little bit, but that's mostly, those are kind of American ideals. So there is that Timothy Keller that he was in New York City, very successful there. He's a great, very conservative, Orthodox type Christian too, who had a lot of success in New York City. But his success came with immigrants, a lot of Asian immigrants actually, but that was kind of his read. I know Link Twin Cities, we work with them a little bit here in Minneapolis. There are some other cities as well, but they certainly see that it's the immigrants coming from not all countries. Somalia is very difficult, but if they're coming from places like Ethiopia, South America, certain like Southern European countries, they come over with more of these traditional values, and Christianity is much more ingrained in their family structure. So they're coming over, and I mean, voting wise, I don't know where they're voting, but I do know that they are very much more open to Christianity. So there is that positive side to where now I don't want to open the border for the sake of, bringing more Christians in so we can pack our pews. I don't think that's a good moral stance, but there is this backside to where God can work through these very broken systems and through these kind of greedy endeavors, and he can do a lot of good for his church through that. So there is an opportunity there, which is nice.
And along the same lines, okay, speaking of broken systems, look, people are fleeing Venezuela for a reason. It's because it's a despotic government. It's a disaster in Venezuela. You have all kinds of things. I mean,
and their currency inflated by like 90%, like a decade ago or 5 years ago.
And the violence in the streets is incredible, and so there's a reason why they're fleeing those countries. They don't want to repeat here. So I think it's a miscalculation to suggest that they're going to blindly sort of fall in line behind the people who facilitated this mess. I think they're going to say, no, I want freedom. I want my kids to be free, and I want prosperity, and I don't want government hanging over my head all the time.
So what do you think? So there's certainly a lot of global trends going on. Some of it has to do with immigration. Some of it has to do with some of these countries in South America, certainly within Europe, things like that. There's kind of nationalist type movements in a lot of countries, including India. And I have no idea how much you follow anything like that, but if you had to flash forward 20 years from now, what do you think things are going to look like?
Well, I don't remember if we went through this in our last visit or not. But the thing is, I think you can get away with a lot as long as you can control the means of communication. And I think that's what this Murphy versus Missouri case is about, is being able to control the channels of communication. The problem is it's just the internet has allowed people who would never have been heard to have prominent voices. And there's just no way to stop it. You can't. They can work really hard to prevent this from getting out, but they're not going to be able to. So at the end of the day, it's going to be populism. People are going to figure out that no, there's a lot more of us than there are of you. And the hard part, though, is people who have our perspective on things, okay, broadly, for the most part, just want to be left alone.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have any desire to be commanding other people and telling them what to do and how to live their life. We want to be left alone to worship and be with our families and prosper and be healthy and happy and all those things. So what's hard about it is getting people like us to stand up and say, no, I'm not going to tolerate this anymore, and make a difference. And that's what they've been effective at throttling, is sort of people being able to come together and find common ground and agree and then start to build a movement.
Mm-hmm.
So, we haven't really seen that at scale yet, but it's coming, because it's the death by 1,000 cuts. People's quality of life is diminishing every day. The prices at the grocery store, the prices at the pump are going up every single day. We're seeing what we're doing overseas, and we're fighting in wars that, let's just say they're highly contentious, whether we should have any involvement or not, okay, at all. And I think people are getting sick of it. And so what do I see 20 years from now? I see a lot of people saying, I get it now. We can't afford to be complacent anymore. We have to have an active role, because if we don't, we're going to be exploited. And it's not going to be the America we knew, So I think the good guys are going to win. It's just going to take some time to get there.
Do you think we'll be on the other side of it 20 years from now?
I hope so.
Yeah.
I hope so. It seems to me that's about right. That's a pretty good time
20
frame.
years. Yeah.
I bet we'll be on the other side of it.
Yeah.
It might even be a little less than that.
Okay.
But
I can retire in peace is what you're saying.
Yeah.
33, 50. So give another 10 years. At least by the time I'm 63, I can just put my feet up and
Perfect.
The battles will be done.
That sounds great. That's about when I'm going to retire too. At least I hope to.
Yeah.
So,
what was the text you sent me yesterday? It was a great quote. I forget who it's by, but you'll have 60 years where nothing happens, and then all of a sudden everything reaches a point.
Lenin.
Oh
yeah. You have
not Lenin the Beatles.
No, V.I. Lenin.
Yeah.
Right. That guy.
Not as happy of a guy.
No. But who was, compared to Stalin, he was actually probably a good guy.
Yeah.
Anyway, the quote was, there are decades where nothing happens, and then there are weeks where decades happen.
Yeah.
And we touched on that, I think, during our last visit. Like, if you look back on the last 4 years, you could pick from one of 300 headlines that in any other year would have been the biggest story of the entire year. Wait, you're doing what? You're forcing us to put masks on all of our faces? Why? Wait, you're saying we can't go outside? We're not allowed to go to church? What? And that was all in 2020.
Yeah.
And then you start looking at 2021, and then you start looking at 2022. It's like, so things are happening at a bewildering rate.
Yeah. And that's the value of having you on here, because I'm not plugged in enough, and you're much more plugged in. And it's been since February. So we're talking maybe 4 months since we talked last time, 3-4 months. And within that time, there's so many different things that have happened. Some of the things have come and they've ended, or I don't know if they've ended, but they've been kind of pushed out of there's so many different moving parts that are playing into these local and these global pictures. So it's good to have kind of a pulse on that.
Yeah. No, there are people working every day to exert influence. No question about it. Yeah.
What else should we have our eyes on?
So
could be national. It could be, I know you've got some of these kind of, some of these local cases, which the local cases are important because this is the beginning of the snowball, right? The snowball starts at a local spot and then it moves down the hill and eventually it becomes this big national headline, but it didn't start there. It started locally with these little movements.
Right. So I mentioned the last time I had one case, I forget where things were. I had one case with the Supreme Court, the Jacobs versus Columbia Heights case. That was the recall that there was a city council member there who they didn't care for what she was saying very much or what she did, and so they began this recall campaign against her. So good news, the election was canceled. We got the W at the Supreme Court. Don't have the full formal opinion yet, but the court agreed with us that this wasn't malfeasance, that this, we're not going to have an election. She's not going to be kicked out of office. So that was good. So that happened. The other thing that happened recently here that was really interesting was my colleague James argued last week in Minnesota Voters Alliance versus Hunt was the name of the case. And this is about this felon voting law in Minnesota. So last year, the legislature changed the law to say, if you are not actually physically incarcerated, okay, then you can vote. So even if you're convicted of a felony, as long as you're not sitting in prison, you can vote. Used to be, you had to finish your probation term and you had to pay off any fines or fees, meet any terms of probation, get a chemical dependency evaluation or do an anger management assessment or whatever it is. Okay. All those things had to be done before you could vote again.
So you're fully released at that point. You're out of the system. No one's looking over your shoulder at that point.
Yep. Correct.
So now you can go vote.
Now you can go vote. Right. So they changed the law. Okay. But here's the deal. The Constitution, in Minnesota Constitution, Article 7, Section 1, okay, says if you're convicted of a felony, then you can't vote unless restored to civil rights. Okay, plural. All right. Well, the law last year that was passed by the legislature said you get the right to vote back. Well, it's only one right. Why does that matter? It's not just picking a fight for the sake of picking fights, okay? Historically, there have been three rights, okay, that sort of always go in a bundle together. And those three rights are the right to vote, the right to sit on a jury, and the right to hold public office. Okay? So there's the rub, because the other side doesn't want to restore your right to hold public office, because then, wait, who's our governor? He was convicted of, you see what I mean?
Yeah,
I mean,
he's on probation and he's also the governor.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Well, yes, he was a convicted, and I'm not talking about Tim Walz, okay? I'm talking about a future scenario where someone who was convicted of a felony decides the next day, this scam thing worked out pretty well, and I'm going to run for mayor. There's tons of money coming in from taxpayers.
If you're good at scamming, you'd be a great mayor.
Right, exactly. So needless to say, that's a political disaster, right? So they don't mention that part. They mention the right to vote. And it also happens, okay, that the calculation is that felons will overwhelmingly vote for one side party over the other. Exactly. And so, my colleague made the argument that, hey, look, you don't get to pick and choose. And I can't tell you all of the rights that need to be restored, but I can tell you this, it's got to be more than one. Got to be more than one. And the argument on the other side was basically that by restoring the right to vote, you then automatically get the right to sit on a jury, and you automatically get the right to run for public office. And just because the statute doesn't say that, okay, that doesn't mean that they're not there. So that was really the thrust of their case. And as you can imagine, okay, this was spun up into something that it was never about, which is, well, we're disenfranchising 55,000 felons, and now we're denying suffrage to them.
So this affects 55,000 votes.
That's the estimate, right? It's 55,000 votes, 55,000 felons. Now, from a different perspective, okay, a perspective that I happen to hold, all right, when the Constitution was drafted, how many felonies were on the books? Not too many. Mm-hmm. Pretty tough to get a felony back then. Today, you'll probably commit a felony this week. Okay. Having an expired prescription drug in your medicine cabinet that you weren't supposed to have. Sorry.
Officially not guilty, but also that's scary.
Right. And
in case anyone's watching, not guilty, but also exactly. I got to call my wife real quick.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Just make a phone call after the podcast. But, another one that along the same lines is, you commit a felony if you commit property damage in excess of $1,000. Okay. When that was written, it was like, yeah, $1,000 is a pretty hefty sum. Today, if you rear end somebody at a stoplight, you cause $1,000 worth of damage with your eyes shut, right?
So they could, if they wanted to, push for a felony.
Now, the difference is intent. Okay. Yep. So if you rear end somebody at a stoplight, you're obviously not doing it intentionally. So you'll probably beat the charge.
But if you got your hand out the window and you're yelling and you do that, that could be a felony.
Throw a rock at somebody's car.
Yeah.
It hits in the wrong spot. We got to replace this quarter panel and other ones.
So are those left there just on accident, or are those there because you can use that as a weapon?
Great question.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm. And that's right. It's a great way to control a population, making sure that there's no clarity, that there's constant confusion. You're always guessing. Am I guilty? Am I not guilty? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But the point is, a different way to go about this would be, let's take a hard look at some of the things that we call felonies in our society today. Is that the direction we want to go? Because I think we got a heck of a lot of crimes on the books, and they could be cleaned up. So, but anyway,
is that going to be part of the case?
Nope.
Or no, this case is strictly on.
Yep.
Yeah.
Strictly on whether that question, how we answer that question. The other thing that's also being argued with the case that I should mention is they're arguing standing. Okay, because my colleague brought this case saying that they have taxpayer standing. Okay, and they're challenging an expenditure by the legislature, which is arguably the main thrust of this. Okay, is to change the felon voting law, but along with that, they're expending X amount of money. I think it was 20,000, or I could be wrong about that. I think it's more than 20,000, but regardless, they're spending money to sort of increase awareness or educate people about what the new law means. Okay, so that in order for you to have taxpayer standing just means that you have a real tangible stake in the outcome of whatever the litigation is. Mm-hmm. And so you bring this taxpayer standing idea because there's an expenditure, because they've expended money. And as long as the government expends money, you have standing as a taxpayer. Okay. I think the procedural posture is strictly a quo warranto petition, which is sort of an old common law thing that demands that the government justify its action. You say, show me where you get the authority to be able to do this. So that's sort of the procedural posture. So there was an argument about standing too. Mm-hmm. This is on the Supreme Court's desk right now. Like I said, it was just argued last Monday.
Okay, so it is at the Supreme Court.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And this Minnesota Supreme Court.
Yeah.
So so it's on their desk, and I think we'll probably get a pretty quick decision about it, just because we're beginning to enter campaign season, and you're starting to see primaries and conventions and things like that, and it won't be long before early voting starts, and so they'll want to have this question answered before that. Mm-hmm. So I think we'll get a decision probably in the next 2 to 3 months, I would say.
All right. So what else you got for us, Greg?
Okay. Well, so I've got to mention what's going on with Dr. Jensen's cases. There are two of them. Mm-hmm. So the one we brought in state court, obviously that was the data practices case to try to, figure out what information there might be that we hadn't seen yet.
And for those that might have missed the first episode, just a very brief synopsis of what that is. So Dr. Scott Jensen, he was running for governor here in Minnesota.
Right. So what happened was, and this is not unique to Minnesota either. You're seeing this happen all over the place. But he was investigated, multiple times for public speech, for comments he made on social media pages or TV stations or in newspapers or on the campaign trail or an affidavit he signed in support of a lawsuit in a different state. And so what the case is really about is the difference between speech and professional conduct. And case law is really clear in this area. Case law says that there has to be a nexus between the professional and the person getting the services, whether it's a doctor-patient, whether it's an accountant and their client, whether it's a lawyer and theirs. You have to have individualized information that's exchanged. And then you have to have professional advice based on that information. That's what it says. But what was done here was it was seen from the perspective of the recipient of the information and not from the perspective of the person delivering the information. So then the question became, again, this rhetorical sleight of hand. How would someone else have perceived what you said? And because someone else might have perceived that a certain way and then taken certain actions based on that, you can't say that because it's just too dangerous that this person might take it the wrong way, or they might act on something or misunderstand or whatever. So therefore, you're only allowed to say this. So these were all, based on public complaints. And again, all of them are examples, nearly all of them are examples of public speech. So that's what the case is about. So we wanted to know what we didn't know. So we brought a data practices case against the AG's office and Keith Ellison in Carver County. That we got an order on that one week before last. And basically, it was about what we expected, and it was about what we hoped. And so both sides are content with where things are with that one. We got some information that we didn't get before. And a lot of it was protected information, which we sort of expected. I mean, a lot of that is attorney-client privileged, and we understand that. But the other case is the federal case. That one is addressing these underlying constitutional violations, these First Amendment claims. And, the underlying point is that just because someone becomes a doctor, they don't surrender their First Amendment rights. Okay. They still get to speak. They're protected more than ever. So, anyway, that case turns out we got an order the next day, which was Good Friday. We got an order Good Friday in the evening that dismissed the case for lack of standing in that case. So we vehemently disagree with the court's decision, but at the same time, okay, we're grateful because it's giving us an opportunity to elaborate, to expand on all the different ways that the Board of Medical Practice and its members were completely out of bounds in what they did to Scott. And so, needless to say, we're relishing the opportunity.
Because it gets you appeal, and then it goes to...
We're not appealing because we are actually filing an amended complaint in federal district court. Right. And so it's a chance to sort of draw out even more of their conduct, what they did to inhibit his rights and infringe on his rights. So we're leaving no stone unturned, and we're making sure that all T's and I's are crossed and dotted.
So is there a chance that the next time we have you on, let's say late summer or something like that, could this be remedied by then? Or is that too quick? And
we hope so.
Yeah,
we hope so. This case was moved once. We were supposed to have arguments on this motion to dismiss last August, and we didn't have the hearing until December 1st. That was not moved on our motion. That was not moved on the other side's motion. That was on the court's own motion. So I hope so. I hope this is done very quickly. It should be, by all counts. The arguments are pretty clear, but we don't know.
Yeah.
We can control. So we'll see.
All right. We're rooting for you.
We are optimistic. Our argument is rock solid.
Yeah.
So, and we're just getting started.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's going to be good. It's going to be a fun one.
Yeah, absolutely. That one will make, national news.
Yeah, it could well. And we're going to do what's right. Not just by Scott, but we're going to do what's right by physicians across Minnesota. Because right now, the way the law is written, it prohibits professional conduct that's likely to harm the public. Professional conduct that's likely to deceive or defraud the public. Okay. You can't do that. Okay. What's the problem with that? Well, the problem with that is a doctor isn't treating the public. An accountant isn't rendering advice to the public, right? A lawyer's not advising the public. You're advising your client. You're advising the patient. So how do you engage in conduct that's likely to harm the public when you're talking to your patient in an exam room? There's a disconnect there. See what I mean? So the only way you can sort of square that circle is by equating speech and conduct. And we know you can't do that because speech is protected. So once you go beyond that and you start regulating professional conduct as speech, that's when you have your constitutional violations. So, doctors across the state right now are frightened that they're going to say the wrong thing, which in the last few years has been misinformation. We talked about that earlier.
And what it goes back to that says who, right? And who becomes this judge that comes down and says, this is misinformation? Because Dr. Scott Jensen is a doctor and he strongly disagrees. He says, no, this is right information. You're the one giving wrong information. And if someone else holds those keys, then all of a sudden he doesn't even have the option to give his point of view, which is an actual professional point of view. And I think history's shown that his point of view was extraordinarily valid. But
Absolutely.
if you're going to silence those voices, that goes back to that's where the First Amendment has been overturned, and that's where it produces real harm, and that ripples across the country.
Yes, and not just that what I'm saying is right, not just that what he said is factually accurate, but one step beyond that, which is you have no right to regulate anything I say, whether it's accurate or whether it's inaccurate. I could be telling deliberate falsehoods and I get the full protection of the First Amendment. That's reality. That's why it's there. Nobody else gets to decide what I get to say or not. There's information. Okay.
Yeah.
There's not misinformation, just there's information. And then the listener decides, is this accurate or is this inaccurate? True, false. That's my job to figure that out. Nobody else gets to tell me what's true and what's false.
Goes back to the misinformation.
I tell me precisely.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's an update on those two.
Yeah.
And we're looking forward to the next steps.
What other areas do you see there being misinformation?
Oh, I see all over the place. How about jobs?
Yeah.
How about the job numbers?
Yeah.
Employment numbers, which I don't think employment is a great way to measure success to begin with.
That's always the one you hear first. I don't watch too much news, but I might be on like the Stairmaster and they've got the TVs up there and you always hear jobs. CNBC, I think, is on in the morning or whatnot. The Squawk, what's it called?
Squawk Box.
Squawk Box. Yeah. And they're always talking about jobs.
Yeah.
And sometimes Bitcoin's in the upper right and that's where I'll look. And then, but they've got the jobs things going on.
Right. Yeah, that's very interesting. So there's an old story about Milton Friedman. And I quote Milton Friedman a lot. Brilliant economist.
Yeah.
And he took a trip to Panama when they were building the Panama Canal. And there were lots and lots of people who had shovels that were digging the Panama Canal. And he was with the premier of the country at the time. And the premier of the country said, behold, we're building a canal. And Milton Friedman said, well, he said, where are the steam shovels? Where's all the heavy equipment to get this project done? And, the premier of the country said, no. He said, you don't understand. All these people have jobs now. See, they wouldn't have jobs if it weren't for this. So look at all the people we're employing. And so Milton Friedman said, oh, I see. He said, my fault. I thought this was about building a canal. If this is about jobs, he's like, then give them teaspoons. You can employ 10 times as many people to start digging the channel with teaspoons.
Yeah.
And so that's why when we look at job numbers, it's like, okay, but what I'm more interested in is the most efficient way to complete this job. Not how many people I can figure out to do it, but what's the best way to accomplish this goal. So that's why I think jobs numbers to begin with, not to mention the fact that they're completely cooked, a total joke.
Yeah.
I mean, they've been downwardly revised now for a year straight. Hey, great news. We added 400,000 jobs. Oh, that's terrific. And then 3 weeks later, there's been a couple adjustments. It turns out it's only 150,000 instead of 400.
Yeah. So how do they do that? How do they make those adjustments and, keep altering kind of the way that you read these numbers?
Well, it's like anything else. Anything has a 15-minute news cycle and the headline looks really good. And when you publish the headline at the beginning, and there are lots of things that keep an eye on the jobs numbers. So they make them look really good. And then 3 weeks to a month later, they print the revision when nobody's looking. It's like releasing stories on Friday afternoon. That's when they always come out.
Yeah.
The ones that are damaging, they come out Friday afternoon. And by Monday, people forget.
Yeah.
Same thing.
It's kind of like the CPI, right? Like they always talk about CPI for inflation.
Right.
And it seems like I think it very much is just an atrocious way to measure real inflation, which is probably on purpose.
100%. Yeah. If we used the same metrics that we used back in the 80s, have you seen this?
No.
There was a site called shadowstats.com. And I'm not sure if it's still around or not, but it was for a very long time. And they used numbers that they used back in the 80s, the same metrics. If we use those numbers today, our inflation rate, I think the last I saw would be 18%, 20%.
Yeah, that sounds accurate.
Yeah. But today we remove things like gas and food, and shelter, because nobody spends money on those things.
No, not our families.
No, you spend money on these things that we pick for you to choose.
Yeah.
So it's the CPI is a scam too.
Yeah.
No question.
Yeah. If everyone could realize that, I think conversations economically would move in such a better direction, because people get caught up in that.
Right. And, we talk, speaking of that and speaking of inflation, one of the things that's so insidious is people look at their bank accounts, and I mean, not to mention the fact that people are suffering enormously right now, and people need to understand how fortunate we are here in Waconia, here in Minnesota, but people are hurting, but the problem is you can always print more money. We saw that during COVID. I mean, there were stimmy checks falling from the sky for what? I don't know. Hey, we got another $3,000 for what? Because we got kids. Congratulations. Yeah. Hey, stimmies, right? This will work for sure. This will lift us out of this disaster. Well, of course not. Of course it hasn't. And we're right back to where we were. But you can always print more money. And so when people look at their bank accounts, they see they got these big balances, they feel pretty good. But you can't print more stuff.
Yeah.
And that's the problem that we're running into is that's finite. Money's not. So,
and it's kind of a blind suffocation financially, because you might, 15 years ago, if my dad would have gotten a 6% raise, that would have been huge. A 6% raise year over year. Now you can get a 6% raise, and you're still, if you go off that 18% number, you're still losing 12%. You have 12% less purchasing power next year. Right. So, I mean, when people look and they go, I got a 6% raise, that's great. Okay. You might actually be in worse shape than you were last year.
Absolutely.
But we don't think that way. And so you can kind of, be happy with those little raises, but you really got to be outpacing
100%.
With inflation, or figuring out ways to kind of work around. I mean, like for us, we get a quarter cow. And that's a beautiful way where we can avoid a lot of these markups, because we're not dealing with the whole production line, and we're not dealing with higher costs of transportation and gas and processing fees and, what it costs to sit on a shelf at the local grocery store. So you can find some ways around that help. But either way, I mean, you can't get completely out of the pot of water.
No, that's right. That's right. And inflation people need to see inflation for what it is, which is it's a tax.
Yeah.
And it's a regressive tax that impacts the poorest disproportionately. People who don't make a lot of money are suffering more than anybody else is, because they're on a fixed income. Like you said, 6% raise, fantastic. 18% inflation. So that trip to the grocery store where your $100 used to buy you a week's worth of food. I mean, that's good for 3 days now, 4 days. You're spending $200 a week now.
And they're not investing, though, because the one way you can somewhat push back against it is, okay, if inflation's high, investments probably go up to some degree, if nothing else artificially. So if nothing else, you might say, wow, I got a 12%, increase in my stock portfolio or whatever. Okay, well, I got a 6% raise, 12% in my stock portfolio. I think I'm doing really good. Actually, I've just broken even. So like I survived. But for those poor people, they don't have a stock portfolio. So they're not riding a 12% wave of the S&P 500 for the year.
Right.
Because they are just buying their groceries and, maybe putting $100 in the bank if they're lucky.
Yep. So have tangible assets, have real things. That's the best advice. Hedge, spread things out. I'm not a financial advisor or anything like that, obviously. Neither are you.
No.
But people need to be awake to it. That printing these vast sums of money into existence, and that's not quite accurate. It's more like we're lending it into existence, or we're borrowing it into existence, depending on what your perspective is. But it carries consequences, and our kids and our kids' kids are going to have to pay this back.
Yeah,
somebody's got to pay this back. Money's got to come from somewhere. So, yeah.
So you had one other case that I think is interesting, and then I want to ask you some kind of global questions. There's a couple interesting things you've talked about before.
Sure,
but what's that other case?
The other thing that's happening right now that people should be aware of is these two bills. There's one in the House, and there's a companion bill in the Senate right now. They're basically mirrors of each other. Okay, and people have different perspectives about it. Okay, but here's the bottom line. What's happening is that these bills were introduced as they pertain to daycare centers. Okay, so right now in Minnesota, in terms of your vaccine schedule, okay, We have the conscientious objector exemption, which means if you...
Is that common in most states, by the way?
It's not.
Oh, it's not? Okay.
No, it's not.
I should have let you explain it, but yeah.
No, that's fine. So it's what you can do as a parent is you can say, I'm going to choose my own schedule. Okay. I have my feelings on it, my beliefs, and I can sign a statement or get a notarized statement that says, these are my beliefs, and I don't follow the same schedule as you do. And you have to give that to the I think Department of Health. They get a copy of it or whatever. And then you can go on your own schedule. Okay. That's the law here. Well, these bills being introduced say, well, what we're going to do now is we're going to allow daycare facilities to exempt themselves from the conscientious objector exemption. Meaning that paragraph, that subsection of the law that says you can pick your own schedule and you can choose which shots you want your kids to take. Daycare centers can now say, no, you can't. And the reason why that's important is because daycare centers take money from the state. And it isn't hard to see, drawing a straight line between here and there, that this is state money and it comes with strings attached. So if a daycare center says, we want to keep the conscientious objector exemption, well, they're taking state money. So the argument down the road is this is the camel's nose under the tent. And you remove this ability to sign the exemption for parents from daycare facilities. And then the next step is going to be, preschools. The next step is going to be kindergartens and grade schools and everything else. And pretty soon there it goes.
So does that seem like a crazy jump from what you've seen historically, that they would set up a law where they kind of say, okay, now daycares can choose this, and then they would use their tax dollars to actually then, influence what the daycares do? Would that be kind of the first time something like that's happened, where they pass a law and then they back end a more long-term plan?
Nope, not at all.
So they know how to play chess and not just checkers.
They know how to play chess. Yep. And you see examples of that all over the place. Okay. I mean, few people know, okay, if you wanted to, for example, if you wanted to say, we believe that the 0.08, for example, okay, the 0.08 for DWIs in Minnesota is too low. We don't think it should be a DWI unless you're at a 0.15, okay, because it's just 0.08. You can still see well enough but I don't know what argument you're going to make. Okay, yeah. It doesn't matter. Okay. Well, the only way to do that is, let me put it a different way. What the federal government can do is they can say, okay, you can move to 0.15, but if you move to 0.15, you're not going to get any federal money for roads. So the state says, oh, well, we have this interstate that goes this way and another one that goes this way. How are we supposed to, I don't know what to tell you. Okay. Because then it's not the federal government saying you can't raise the limit to 0.15. It's the federal government saying, no, it's our money. We're giving it to you. It just so happens there's some strings attached to it.
Yeah.
So shifting back to what we were talking about a moment ago, well, we are giving you state money, but there are strings attached to it. So, you don't know exactly how it's going to manifest itself, but the bottom line is that people need to be aware that both of these bills, as of now, where we stand right now, are almost certain to pass. And this will become the law in this state.
Really? So this one's most likely going to go through?
It's highly likely.
Yeah.
So we'll see where that goes. And I don't know. I think it sounds like the Senate bill might get slipped into the omnibus spending package. So they don't want to make it a campaign issue because they realize parents like things like choice for their kids. Okay. So they don't want to make a big deal of it. They're going to slip it into the bigger spending package. But yeah, these are coming.
And that starts the snowball where they could then move it to preschool, kindergarten, elementary school.
Absolutely. And again, there's right. That's where we are. So people need to be aware, keep an eye on it. Yeah. But right now, we'll see. Hopefully, if you feel strongly about these things, you should be out making noise. You should be contacting your legislators. And
that's what we keep hearing. It's
I know. But again, it comes back to people like us generally just want to be left alone.
Right.
And so, but the other side just can't do that. It's this weird personality trait people that have to dictate what others do and control their lives. And why is it that they always wind up in government? It's always the way it works.
I always liked it. I think it was Chesterton. He said he would much rather open up a phone book and to a random page and just take whoever's on that page, take left side, right side, and put those 50 people into office than whoever's running. And his point was whoever's running usually has a reason why they're running. You might have the few that are fighting back against this, right? Yeah. They're finally saying, okay, you've get off my property. I'm going to fight back. Right. But for the most people, there are these people that, they want to push these things through. They want to like make these big changes. And normal people are just kind of sitting there saying, as you said earlier, I want to go to church on Sunday. I don't want you to tell our church what we're supposed to be talking about. Let us talk what we're talking about. Let me do on my property what I'm going to do on my property. Let me send my kids. Let me raise my kids how I want to do. Mm-hmm. And someone else is coming and going, no.
Nope.
We're going to do it for you.
That's right.
And that's been an overt statement, hasn't it, recently?
100%. And once you begin going down this path of government as protector, as being fulfilling this role of keeping you safe from harm, that's a very, very dangerous path to go down. Mm-hmm. Because that's what every despotic regime in history has said. Mm-hmm. We're doing this for your own good. We're taking care of you. And that means what Reagan said, I'm from the government. I'm here to help. 7 scariest words in the English language.
Yeah.
There it is right there. I'm here to help. Help me, just leave me alone.
So when Fred Hinz was on, he kind of, so he was talking about some of these things more, a couple different cases and stuff dealing with more with religious liberty, but he kind of put the crosshairs at education and said that that's really where the front of the battle is. Why do they, or do you agree? Do you think that education is something that they are, in other words, the way that they educate your children, right, in the next generation, do you see that as something that they aim towards? And if so, why?
So there was a story here not too long ago about school lunches. And I don't know how far this got, okay, but it doesn't matter because it illustrates the point, okay, that there was discussion of withholding money for school lunches unless there was some sort of an affirming program. You had to affirm something about transgender students, or there was some carve out for schools that didn't recognize or whatever it is properly exalt transgender students or whatever it was. There's absolutely no justification for that unless you're pushing an agenda. Mm-hmm. And if you didn't care about education, or if you wanted people to have their own choice and freedom in how they educate their kids, you wouldn't be pushing things like that. Mm-hmm. But they are. And it's not unusual, and it happens every day. So yeah, absolutely. That's the edge. That's the cutting edge.
Do you know, is that something that historically takes place in countries where they move towards kind of a totalitarian or larger government, things like Nazi Germany, mm-hmm. Lenin, Stalin? Mm-hmm. I mean, are these things that they normally do as part of the playbook?
100%. A cultural revolution in China. Perfect example. They had to destroy the olds, the 3 olds or something like that.
Okay.
And they moved the old culture out, destroyed the old culture, and it was led by students and young people. And people were publicly humiliated if they didn't get on board. And so, yeah, there's a wholesale destruction of the old cultural norms and values and mores. Happens every time. Mm. And did you notice that we're adopting a new flag in Minnesota now? We're destroying the old flag.
So what is the new flag?
Oh, why? It's some tricolor obnoxious.
Oh, is it really?
Yeah, right. It's something with a triangle on the left side, and it has a couple of stripes on it, and it's black. And
what, do you have any idea? Do you know what the symbolism's about? Or?
No.
Okay. No, but either way, we're replacing our old flag.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. And that's one of many, many examples you can point to. That.
Who was the Italian prime minister? You had sent me a couple things with her. Or I don't know if she was the prime minister.
Meloni?
She was running.
Giorgia Meloni.
Yeah. She was you sent me a couple speeches of hers. They were,
she's fire.
She's impressive.
She very much so. Very much so. I think Europe in general is waking up to a lot of the things that are being done in the name of protecting us.
Yeah.
Whether it's green or whatever it is. That's been what's been in the news a lot lately is you have these farmer protests around the world in France and Germany and Belgium and the Netherlands. And there are these restrictions being passed by the EU. Okay. And these European Union bureaucrats are passing these laws that say that family farms that have been around for 200 years are destroying the environment.
No way.
Oh yeah. Cows, pigs. It's just too dangerous because they use fertilizer, or they, the cows are just too damaging because of, whatever. So their stated goal is to close down. I want to say it's something like 60%. They want to eliminate 60% of family farms.
That's insane.
Right. And so these farmers are going, no. And so we were talking just off cam here a couple minutes ago. These guys know how to do it. Like I want to say it was France. They brought these manure spreaders downtown, and they sprayed down all these government buildings in manure. Yeah. And then they had these guys who were like bricklayers who showed up with all these bricks. So they started building walls around these. I mean, crazy. But the point is, okay, that the lights are coming on. Mm-hmm. And I think the trucker protests in Canada ignited this fire, and people are standing up.
You were telling me they had more of a victory than was portrayed. Is that correct?
Oh, absolutely.
So what happened there?
Because
the popular narrative, right, was like they got riled up and government told them to go home, and they went home.
Yep. But the reality was it was about speech, and all of those truckers were calling attention to something, and the government was absolutely wrong. And so if nothing else, the rest of the world looked at that and saw it as an inspiration. We now know that at the flip of a switch, bank accounts can be confiscated and destroyed. All your assets can be taken. Your property can be taken. Your trucks can be confiscated, and they're gone at the drop of a hat. We know now that can be done. And that awakening by itself is hugely important. Mm-hmm. And none of this in Europe would be going on if it weren't for those trucker protests in Canada. Mm-hmm. No doubt in my mind.
So that's going on in a handful of countries now with protests and things. Are they gaining ground, or is the EU holding and saying we're gonna keep doing what we're doing?
I don't know how. I in my opinion, I think the EU is on its last legs.
Yeah,
I just can't see how. I mean, there's so much disunity. Someone was just somebody who's loyal to Russia was just elected in, I think, Slovakia.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
I mean, and you already have Hungary, and then you have, sort of changes going on in Poland too. So, the bottom line is it's all well and good until you actually have to do something about mm-hmm. it. And there's no homogeneity among a lot of these countries because they don't have the same interests. They don't have the same goals. Mm-hmm. So you're really trying to force something that isn't there, and cracks are showing, and people have had it. So yeah,
and that's kind of the push that that lady, what's her name in Italy?
Meloni.
That was kind of her push, right? Because I think one of the speeches you sent me, she actually quoted G.K. Chesterton, where he says he's writing 1915, something like that, and he says in 100 years we're gonna have to fight wars over whether or not a leaf is green, right? In other words, just letting sanity be sanity will actually be under attack. Yeah. So she quoted that. But then she was just talking about like their Christian heritage as Italians and some of their other cultural heritage, but she really focused on that Christian heritage. And she's basically saying things like the EU, some of these kind of macro globalist type entities are trying to remove that, right? So you no longer have your identity, which to your point, it's let's change the flag in Minnesota, right? Or let's not let a church speak the way that a church has spoke for the last 2,000 years, right, to defend your borders, all of these different things, right? And she says those things are under attack. And it seems like, because she was elected, right? Mm-hmm. So she had what she was saying was popular in Italy. Sounds like it's being popular in other countries. But the thing that gives me hope there is people are returning back to their tradition, and they're saying that's who we are. And we've been deceived by media and by these inner room politicians and whatever you want to call them. Right? They've been deceiving us into thinking that reality is something that it's not. And really what is important is my family, my faith, all of these things that's where real life is, not these kind of globalist endeavors and such.
100%. Yep, absolutely. Lights are coming on. And you're seeing people that are, and again, like the AFD, the alternative, I forget what it is, it's Für Deutschland, the AFD, whatever, now is being painted as this extreme, insane, far right, whatever. By the way, anytime you hear those words like extreme right or hard right or whatever,
it's a lot like misinformation, right? You should probably go, that might be right, actually.
Yeah, they're onto something. Yeah. Exactly. So the AFD was just this minor party in Germany, but with the rise of immigration, seeing what's happened to these cities across the country, the AFD is now, I want to say it's like the second or third largest party in Germany, which is a big deal. And their express platform is, we're done. This is not working. Sweden, the same thing's happening in Sweden. Mm-hmm. This isn't working. I'm sorry, but there's more violence, and people are hurting. So we got to quit. And all of these moves, all of these sort of geopolitical chess moves, are coming at the direction of a central directorate. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, it's just like any command and control economy. I mean, free markets work, and command and control centralized economies don't. Mm-hmm. And this is what it looks like when you have command and control.
Yeah.
And it's not going to change until we begin diversifying again, and we already are.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. And it seems like a lot of countries are on board with that. Mm-hmm. And that actually helps. You can see it in a lot of those countries where there is also a return to the church as they do that, because the church is something that has been a bedrock up until just recently.
Right.
And something has kind of pushed that to the side and tried to replace it. And people are saying the thing that has replaced it is actually not all that good. I want to go back to, mm-hmm. which is healthy. Mm-hmm. And I hope we even see that in your generation, my generation. There was a Pew study, I think it was, that came out. When was this? Maybe 9 months ago or so. And it did have online worship in there. I don't know. You might better look it up, but it was like halfway down where you kind of all this breakdown. But it showed that millennials were actually the biggest one. And I think they jumped from, I think it was maybe 24 to 39%, if I remember right, maybe 24 to 42. It was a huge jump as far as church attendance goes. And this is regular church attendance. The one caveat is I'm not positive, but they might have had online worship in there, which I probably wouldn't count. But either way, if nothing else, I mean, that's a huge jump. And this was in 2 years, right? This is basically from 2021 to 2023. Mm-hmm. So it goes to show even people in their late 20s into their 30s, right, are returning to church. And that's in America.
No question. Mm-hmm. No question. It's hard to get away from, speaking of destroying cultural values and norms. It's funny how, Easter Sunday this year was also Transgender Awareness Day.
Yeah.
Like at some point, you have to say there's a link here.
What was he thinking? What's the play? I can't imagine. That's not popular, is it? Who's that appeasing?
Even if you got
maybe explain what took place exactly for those
So for the first time it was declared. I don't know when exactly it was declared.
I think it was the Friday before. I think it was on Good Friday. I think
was
so like a couple of days before.
Right. I mean, what happened was the Biden administration declared Easter Sunday, to be Transgender Awareness Day, and it was like, what? Why? I mean, again, talk about a political miscalculation. I mean, even if he were to get every transgender vote across the entire country and all their supporters, I mean, you already got those votes.
Right.
So why, what you've alienated a gigantic segment of the population. But the other point I wanted to make is, look, Russia, and I'm not saying that they're without blame. I'm not saying what Putin's doing is whatever you want to say, justified or whatever. Right. But Russia is really among the largest, if not the largest, Christian countries in the world. The Russian Orthodox Church is alive and well and flourishing. Mm-hmm. So at some point you have to start to wonder, like, why is it that we're supposed to hate Russia so much? Mm-hmm. Why is everybody telling me that these are just bad people and they're bloodthirsty? Putin's the next Hitler. He's going to take over Europe. Mm-hmm. He's going to start with Ukraine and then he's going to roll over the rest of it. Why? Like, you know how much land there is in Russia? Like Russia's huge. Like why would they want more land? And they've got plenty of oil and they got plenty of gold and they got plenty of food. And like the problem is they need more people. So how is conquering Europe going to solve any of those problems? It won't.
Yeah.
But funny enough, they are Christians and we're certainly being told that they're the bad guys. Mm-hmm. So
did you watch the Tucker Carlson interview?
I did.
Yeah. What'd you think of that?
I thought it was good. Mm-hmm. I mean, here's my perspective on it. I can't imagine what must have been going through Tucker Carlson's mind.
Yeah.
I mean, you know that walking into that setting, okay, his country doesn't want him there.
Yeah.
He's walking in and there's going to be guards with arms outside the door. Mm-hmm. You know, so he's got to be very careful what he says. And he doesn't know if Putin's going to be hostile, if he's going to make an example of him. He doesn't know if he's going to be open and friendly and candid. He has no idea what he's walking into.
Yeah.
So the fact that he had the courage to go in there and do that is nothing but respect.
I watched his interview with Lex Friedman. So he kind of debriefed on that a little bit. Mm-hmm. That was, for a little while, was fascinating. And Tucker just started rolling Lex and I turned it off. But anyway, some of the points that he made were quite interesting. And the one was, he said, I've got 4 kids. They've all moved out of the house. I think maybe they're all married or something like that. And he's like, I'm no longer afraid of anything. He's like, when I had little kids, I was, because if something happens to me, like what's going to happen to my kids? They're going to be without a father, all this kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. But he's like, I've got this new fearlessness because my kids are out. And he's like, what's someone going to, like, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
You know, kind of a thing.
Right.
The second thing that was interesting was, to your point, he said he felt completely comfortable with everything that Russia was doing. He never felt like they were trying to intimidate him, anything like that. He said it was a very enjoyable time. But he said all of his threats came from the U.S. side. And he said it was fascinating. He said that his legal team, right, who's been his legal team for like 10, 15 years, and they came and they basically said, here's all of these, like, you can't touch these things. And he's like, well, why not? And he's like, because the U.S. is going to get you. And they were like begging him, like, don't do these certain things. I think he even did a couple of them because he's like, well, I got to do these couple of things. But it was all of his threats came from the U.S. side. None of it came. He said, I never had any threats from Russia as far as you better say this, not this, but the U.S., they were the ones. And he's amazing. Like, and he was so shocked by it because he said, Russia is supposed to be this tyrannical, and he's like, and they never once like told me what I could do and what I couldn't do. And, you know,
yeah,
we'll do an interview. That's fine. You amazing. Know, but from the U.S. side, he's like, all of a sudden, my First Amendment rights were being sabotaged by my own country.
Right. I thought there was a story that he may even be taken into custody.
Yeah.
Did you see that when
just
he left the country? Yeah, right. Connected to that story.
Okay.
Connected to the Putin interview.
Yeah.
You know, incredible. And we're supposed to be the example of free speech in the world.
Yeah.
You know, journalistic freedoms. Sorry, Julian Assange is still locked up.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, and we're the bastion of freedom and free speech.
We're supposed to be. Right? Constitutionally, we're supposed to be.
Yep.
But through this, what's the right word? You gave it at the beginning, Coney, or
misinformation.
Yeah, all of that. The phony capitalism. It's not phony.
Oh, crony capitalism. Yeah. Corporate welfare, crony capitalism.
Through that, it's we've got free speech in name, but in practice, people got their fingers on that.
Yeah, no question.
The other one thing that I don't wonder if you saw the same thing from the interview, but anyone who says Putin's lost his mind, they've lost they're not looking at any kind of fact. Putin's on his P's and Q's. I'm not saying he's right. I'm not saying anything, but I do know he does not have like syphilis and he's in his last days and he's like sprinting towards death. That guy's one of the more sharper politicians I've ever seen sit down for, 2 hours and articulate reasons why. Like I said, I'm not saying I agree with them, disagree with them. Mm-hmm. I'm just saying he went through his history. He knew his dates. He talked about meetings. He cordially said, I won't talk about these types of things because those were private meetings. And even though he's not on good terms with the U.S., he says, I'm not going to talk about what Bush and I talked about, but we talked about here. And the one thing I'll say is I asked for a seat at the table and then we didn't get back. And so we had to start to do things on our own because we weren't allowed a seat. So we went through all of these things. Yep. And maybe he's lying. Either way, he's not losing his mind.
No.
So that theory, anyone that says that, you're not on top of it.
No,
he's not losing his mind.
And if someone is making that argument, they're probably lying to you. They're probably manipulating you towards some other goal. Okay. Mm-hmm. because absolutely the way I look at it is what he's doing is what he believes is in the best interests of his country.
Mm-hmm.
He is a patriot, and every action he's taking is for the betterment of Russia. Okay. I would love to be able to say that our administration is acting in the same way, but I cannot.
Mm-hmm.
I cannot understand some of the things that are being done in the name of helping people or making this country a better place. They make no sense to me at all.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas when I look at what he's doing, for better or for worse, it's for his country.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. Can't knock a guy for that.
Those are the people that elected him.
That's right.
I didn't elect him. You didn't elect him. He doesn't owe any allegiance to us.
Nope. And hey, maybe, what is this last election? 85% or something? He got 85% of public support.
Did he really? Which, yeah.
Now, am I saying that there may be manipulation there?
Yeah.
Okay, sure. We have manipulation
right
here. Okay. So but what I can say is that he enjoys overwhelming public support, which is simply not the case here.
Mm-hmm.
We've been more divided. We're more divided now than we've been, certainly in my lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
Not irretrievably so.
Yeah.
And I think it's played up again for political reasons. I think once people start getting this isn't about red team versus blue team anymore.
Mm-hmm.
This is about freedom versus slavery. Really.
Yeah.
And once people start waking up to that, then we can stop this whole construct. We can stop all this silly fighting. We agree on 90%.
Mm-hmm.
So let's just find consensus there.
Mm-hmm.
But then again, once we find consensus, once we start building consensus, that becomes a threat to institutions.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're doing things like deplatforming.
Yeah.
And we're right back to where we were.
And it seems like they know that. It seems like they know that people, if you go into my neighborhood in Cologne, right, and you were to drive through and you were to poll everybody, I bet you've got probably a 60-40 split, maybe 60 red, 40 blue, something like that would be my guess, maybe 65-35.
Mm-hmm.
But I guarantee that 100% of us actually agree on, as you said, probably 80% of any kind of real serious issues.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems like what they do is they come in and they find ways to fabricate and get people riled up against each other.
Mm-hmm.
Because all of these extreme things that we've talked about, these crazy things, I don't think anyone in my neighborhood in Cologne actually believes in any of those things.
Right. Probably not.
But those are the things that they kind of creep in, and they create these divides so that people don't realize, hey, we agree on 80% of this. None of us want insanity.
Right.
There might be some small things on the peripheral where I'll say that's insane, and someone else will say, I don't think that's insane. I think that's okay. Those are peripheral things.
Mm-hmm.
But they do a good job of getting people all riled up. They've got their hot button issues, and that way we go to our leaders and we hand over all the power to them on both the right and left.
100%.
And they're also united because they're getting money from Tyson.
That's right. Not in our best interest.
Yeah.
But as long as we're fighting with each other over whatever the controversy of the day happens to be,
yeah,
then we're not paying attention to what's going on there.
Yeah.
And slowly, our connection to what's happening in Washington and our connection even to what's happening in St. Paul is becoming more and more tenuous every day by design.
So, Greg, I think we've probably going to have 3 or 4 disclaimers for all the misinformation that we've spewed.
Perfect.
And if you lose your case with Jensen, there's a good chance we'll be handcuffed here in the next couple months.
Yeah,
so
good.
We're really rooting for you here.
We'll do our next podcast from the Gulag.
Yes.
Something to look forward to.
Yeah. It'll be good. We'll be with Assange, and it'll be
perfect.
It'll be great.
Good. Freedom and justice.
That's right. Yeah. Well, thank you for coming on.
My pleasure.
Yeah.
Anytime.
All right. Cheers.
Enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Thanks, Brian.